Hello everyone, my name is John Mumm. I'm a water planner for the Interstate Stream Commission of New Mexico. Today, the New Mexico ISC will be presenting an in-depth webinar on the leap ahead analysis. Today's presentation is overview of regional differences, and it's a summary of that by Kristin Pearthree. Next. Kristin, thank you. So if you all have been on past in-depth webinars, we kind of go over these slides each time just to touch base in case you haven't, and just to give you the big picture of what we're covering in the 50-year water plan. So again, the 50-year water plan, we really are seeking engagement of experts and stakeholders across the state of New Mexico. The whole leap ahead analysis piece is to build the science foundation behind the climate change information and science. So we worked with a group of experts and we formed the New Mexico Climate and Water Science team, and through them we were able to build a science foundation on climate change leaping ahead to the 2070. Through that, we go to where we are going to plan on engaging New Mexico boots on the ground, decision makers and experts during the resiliency assessment, where we start talking about how we'll be affected by these changes, if we are resilient to them, and whether or not these resiliency issues are caused by the climate change or whatnot. So that's where we really need that public input. And then through that, we're going to jump to the adaptation strategies from the assessment, and we'll be engaging again the boots on the ground experts, water users to utility professionals, all our experts across the state, and working with the scientists at these adaptation strategies of how we can become more resilient with the changes coming. And then finally, from all that, we want to have recommendations of how we can improve policy, operations, land management, local decision making and makers, and research towards becoming more resilient or maintaining a resilience. Next. And again, this is just kind of our little calendar right now. Again, this is the final in-depth leap ahead analysis webinar. On Wednesday this week, we will be having, on the 1st of September, we'll be having the Resiliency Information Forum, where we'll be talking about resiliency assessment and the initiation of the resiliency assessment and that information. In September, we'll be doing the initiation resiliency assessment, and that information will be coming out soon in the next within this week. And also at the same time, we're going to continue parallel tribal and public outreach and communication. Next. And finally, again, our website has all our information of our project. Jump on there. There also, if you miss any of these recordings, there is a tab on our website that says in case you missed it. So if you want to jump there, it will have all the PowerPoint PDF of the PowerPoints, and if you're looking for the recordings, the title of the presentations all will say recording presentations, and then what presentation is and the data was given. So if you're looking for an actual recording, that's where you want to find it. It will say recording somewhere in that title. And so all our, again, today's being recorded also. If you have any questions or comments on the leap ahead analysis webinars or the 50-year water plan or the resilience assessment, any of those, there's a public input comment page and question page, and there's 4 or 5 different spots on our website where you can jump on there and make a comment or ask a question. So feel free to do that. We're trying to put it in a spot where it's all documented. If you are not on our email list, feel free to shoot an email to the New Mexico Water Planning email. That way we can get you added. But if you have questions or comments, please go to the comment page and make those questions and comments in that location. Otherwise, it won't get recorded and documented as we need it to be. So with no further ado, oh, one final thing, if you have questions at the top of your screen, you see a questions tab. That throughout the presentation, if you have questions, type them there. I will receive them, and at the end of the presentations, we will answer them. And so with no further ado, I'm going to let Kristin take it away.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kristin Pearthree. I am a research scientist here at the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources, and I sort of helped support this project while we developed this report. So the report is an assessment of impacts of climate on New Mexico water resources over the next 50 years, a foundation for the New Mexico 50-year water plan. And this was a collaboration between the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources and the Office of the State Engineer Interstate Stream Commission. So why do we need this? Why is this report necessary? New Mexico's climate is warming, and a new 50-year water plan for the state must account for ongoing and future changes to our climate and water resource reliability. So this chart here shows historic temperature and precipitation records from 1931 to 2020. Temperature is in red and precipitation is in blue. And then these bars that you can see here are the decadal averages for temperature and precipitation. And for temperature in particular, you can see that each decade it's become warmer and warmer and warmer in the historical record. And this is expected to continue into the future. There's not really any clear trend associated with precipitation. It's very variable both annually and decadally. And future projections of precipitation, as we'll discuss later, are also quite uncertain. So we do expect New Mexico's climate to continue to warm in response to increasing concentrations of atmospheric greenhouse gases. So this chart here shows projected temperature change for New Mexico. This is from a suite of models. The orange line is the historical record that we were just looking at. And then this shows two emission scenarios, the higher emissions and then the lower emission scenario. In the higher emission scenario, this is if no mitigation is put in place to reduce greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. And then lower emission scenario is if we do put in some mitigation to decrease the amount of greenhouse gases that we are putting into the atmosphere. But you can see that in both of these scenarios, temperature is projected to be warmer in New Mexico, maybe as high as 7 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit under the high emissions scenario. So in the face of this warming, we need to plan accordingly to manage our water resources. Precipitation is not projected to change much right now, but uncertainty remains very large. So this gray section here is the historical record that we were just looking at. You can see there's not a lot of trend visible in the record. And then projected into the future past 2075, again, we don't see any real discernible trend, but the uncertainty in these projections is really high. And you can tell by how wide this band is here that we're just not sure at this point what precipitation will do. So in light of this and the need to know more about how climate change may affect our water resources, an experienced team of New Mexico research experts was assembled to assess the state of knowledge and develop a review report. And this panel consisted of Dave Gutzler, a climatologist, Fred Phillips, a hydrologist, Craig Allen, an ecologist, Dave Dubois, a climatologist, Phil King, civil engineer, Les McFadden, a soil geoscientist, Bruce Thompson, environmental scientist and engineer, and Ann Tillery, a surface system specialist. And these are all folks who are, at the top of their respective fields. So they assessed and synthesized recent scientific literature on climate, hydrology, and the impacts of these changes on water resources. The topics that were looked at were future climate projections, changes to the surface water budget, ecological dynamics, landscape change, fires and erosion, extreme precipitation and flooding, soils, water supply, and water quality. So a little bit about the process that this report went through. From February to June this year, the panelists met many times to discuss their respective chapters and to review each other's chapters. All of this was led by the 3 editors of this report, Amelia Dunbar here at the Bureau of Geology, Dave Gutzler, and Fred Phillips. And each chapter underwent internal reviews from the other team members. And then in July, 5 scientists provided independent reviews of the document. And then in August, there have been a number of these webinars, with this being the last one. And the authors have been responding to the peer reviews. And then we will release a draft of this report in September for the public comment period. And I strongly encourage everyone to take a look at the document, and please submit your comments and your questions through the ISC's website. And then from October to November, the authors will respond to the public comments and finalize the report due at the end of November. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about a summary of the statewide and regional impacts of climate change on water resources. This is chapter 10 of the report. I'm also going to go into an additional chapter addressing identified data gaps and challenges that we need to fill in order to better understand how climate change might affect our water resources. But I'll start with this chapter. It was written by Amelia Dunbar, Fred Phillips, and David Gutzler. So first, let's talk about some statewide impacts. And what we're really concerned about is how climate change will affect the water balance in New Mexico. So this graphic here shows the general water cycle for the state. Each of these numbers is in million acre feet, and these are fluxes of how water moves through the state. So we have 95 million acre feet of precipitation each year falls onto the landscape. And then we have 2 fluxes where water leaves the landscape, transpiration and soil evaporation. And these 2 fluxes are referred to collectively as evapotranspiration, a term that I'll use throughout this presentation. Transpiration is about 75 million acre feet, and soil is about 17 million acre feet per year. And then we have runoff and recharge. These fluxes constitute the smallest values, but are the most important in terms of generating water that we can really use. This is the water that's used for irrigation, for domestic and municipal and industrial use. So runoff is about 1.5 million acre feet per year, and recharge is about 1.7 million acre feet per year. And what we're interested in is how climate change might change these fluxes and adjust how much runoff and recharge we have available for human use. So climate change could impact New Mexico's water resources in multiple ways. There could be lower stream flow and recharge because of increased aridity. When the atmosphere is warmer, it can really suck more moisture into it like a big sponge from the surface. So that could decrease the amount of water that we then have available for stream flow and recharge. There could be greater interannual variability in precipitation. There could be hotter, more severe droughts. Droughts will happen because of how variable precipitation is, but when temperature is warmer, droughts are more severe. There could be decreasing snowpack and earlier and diminishing snowmelt runoff due to a number of processes, including more precipitation falling as rain or snow evaporating into the atmosphere without becoming runoff. There could be an increase in extreme precipitation. This is seen as likely because when the atmosphere is warmer, it can hold more water and it's more energetic. But projecting extreme precipitation at this point is very uncertain. There could be greater demands on groundwater due to higher aridity and maybe a longer growing season for crops. There could be increased, and also because of decreased surface water. Then there could be increased vegetation stress and change, in part facilitated by increasing catastrophic forest fires. And then there could be increased flooding and sediment transport that could damage infrastructure, irreversible damage to soils through loss of vegetation and erosion, and degraded quality of surface waters. So the panelists really looked for positive effects from climate change, but they were very hard to find, vanishingly few. It seems that the impacts for New Mexico are likely to be overwhelmingly negative. So let's get into some regional variations. So this is just a map of New Mexico showing the topography of the state. It's an incredibly varied state geologically, geographically, and climatically. And so because of this, it couldn't really be divided in any kind of sort of plan view regional way. We decided to divide the state into sections based on areas that should experience or could experience the same effects from climate change. So the regions that were identified are the high mountains, which includes mountains in both the northern and southern part of the states, the Colorado Plateau and the northwestern high desert, this area here, the Rio Grande Rift and Basin and Range were considered as one region, and then the Eastern Plains was another region. And I'm going to go into more detail about each of these regions. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the effects of elevation and topography on climate. This graphic here shows how mountains can impact local and regional climate through how they influence atmospheric convection. So here we see that moist air can rise, is forced to rise up over a mountain until it condenses and produces precipitation. And then oftentimes on the other side of the mountain, when it descends again, it's dry because it's already lost all its rain over here. This is an important concept, the rising and condensing of moist air and producing precipitation in the high mountains, because high mountains are an important source of water for a lot of the surface water in New Mexico, and also a place where a lot of New Mexico's aquifers are recharged. So the high mountains are very important for New Mexico's water resources. And then on an even more granular level, hills, just a regular hill itself, can have quite a different local or microclimate depending on which way the hill is facing. So, I mean, you've probably all noticed this, but hills that face north are cooler and they tend to have higher soil moisture levels, and vegetation that prefers these cooler temperatures and higher soil moisture levels can live at lower elevation on the north side of a hill than they can on the south side of a hill or a mountain. And this is important because the vegetation on the north side relies on a soil mantle to be present here. And often on the south side of hill slopes, soil mantle may not be present at all. It may just be, in New Mexico, bedrock. And this can impact the way water moves over the landscape quite significantly, because soils really facilitate the infiltration of surface water into the ground, into the soil, and then into aquifers. And so when this soil is missing on the south side of slopes, water can run freely over the bedrock and generate a lot of what's called overland flow. And this water is less likely to soak into the ground and more likely to sort of gather steam and cause a lot of erosion and maybe even flooding downstream. So even at a much more local scale, climate can be quite different depending on which direction a hill is facing. And I'm going to give you a real-world example of this. So this is a hill slope. I believe this is in Arizona, but the same is true in New Mexico, where this side of the hill has one of these soil mantles, and it's supporting these plants, these cliff rows. And then this side of the hill has been stripped of this soil mantle. It used to have one. You can tell because of these cliff rows roots here. They used to live in a soil that's no longer present. And as temperature warms and as the soil moisture declines and the vegetation is lost, soil has been stripped from this side of the hill, and it's progressed sort of this direction. And this kind of landscape change could occur here in New Mexico as the climate warms. And it could result in a lot of soil stripping and sediment movement off of the hill slopes and then downstream and into streams and rivers. And this could impact not only the vegetation on the landscape and the way water recharges through a soil, but then also infrastructure such as culverts and reservoirs. So now let's talk about the regions. I'm going to talk about the high mountains first. So the high mountains include the Southern Rocky Mountains, that's the Sangre de Cristos, the Tusas Mountains, and the Sierra Nacimiento up here. And then it also includes the Jemez Mountains. And then the high mountains are also the Mogollon Mountains down here and the Sacramento Mountains in this part of the state. This photo here shows the Sangre de Cristos looking across the rift, and you can see the snow at high elevation. And then this photo is the Mogollon Daddle Mountains. So the effects that the high mountains are expected to experience are a higher relative increase in evapotranspiration relative to the amount of evapotranspiration that they experience today. Declining snowpack and spring runoff, changes in precipitation seasonality with maybe more precipitation in the winter and less in the spring, more precipitation falling as rain instead of snow, and then maybe changes in precipitation locations due to changes in atmospheric convection. They also may experience reduced recharge and water for plant growth, and then pest outbreaks due to warmer temperatures. And you can see this photo here is of an outbreak of Janet's looper caterpillars that have defoliated these pine trees in a watershed north of Santa Fe. And so they've killed the trees. There's also a possibility of a loss of soil stability, especially from south and west or northwest facing slopes, resulting in bare bedrock. So this is a picture of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. You can see there's a forest here that's supported by a soil mantle. And if this soil mantle is stripped and bare bedrock is exposed, it's very hard for plants to recolonize the surface. And so this could have a dramatic effect on the landscape in the high mountains. They could also experience post-wildfire erosion, debris flows, and flooding. There's a projected increase in catastrophic forest fires, and this, when it kills the vegetation, leaves the soils vulnerable to erosion when the vegetation isn't there to hold it in anymore. So this photo here is of the Las Conchas fire, and you can see all the exposed soil. And then this photo here shows these debris flows that have initiated on this hill from up here, and they've just stripped this sediment off as they've moved down slope. And so this can generate a lot of sediment and debris flows, and then that can impact downstream infrastructure like this. So increased erosion leads to downstream aggradation, which is just the accumulation of the sediment that's been removed from the hills. So here you can see in this channel, these boulders have been moved down off of a burn scar in the Gila wilderness. And then these trees as well have toppled over as a result of a fire. Another impact is water quality degradation. One impact is increased suspended sediment due to that erosion from the hills. But there could also be dissolved constituents leached from burn areas. Increased stream temperature due to loss of riparian vegetation could have a significant impact. So this photo here shows a stream where part of the stream has lost its riparian vegetation, and then part of the stream has riparian vegetation. And this vegetation is really important for moderating the temperature of the stream. It not only keeps the average temperature of the water cooler, but it also prevents significant swings from day to night in stream temperature. And this is really important for, in particular, cold water organisms that need the water to be, a certain cold temperature to survive. But cold water also holds more dissolved oxygen. So when the stream heats up, the amount of oxygen that can be dissolved in the water decreases, and this is especially acute at high elevations like mountain streams, because there's already less oxygen in the atmosphere to dissolve into the stream water. So this chart here shows the saturated dissolved oxygen concentration and the temperature. And this pink line is at 10,000 feet. So you can see there's already less oxygen in the stream, even at cold temperatures, relative to a stream at 5,000 feet and a stream at sea level. So mountain streams will likely feel this effect most significantly. So we're going to talk about the Northwestern High Desert. Northwestern High Desert includes the Colorado Plateau, the San Juan Basin, and the Zuni Mountains. It's a high elevation area, but relatively low relief, relatively flat topography. So you can see from some of the photos here, it's an area with quite a lot of arroyos in it. And it's a region of the state that's projected to feel the largest change in temperature. So this is a map showing the result of a 20 model suite. Under a high emission scenario, it shows the % degrees Fahrenheit change from the historical record projected in the future to 2040 to 2069. And you can see that this section of the state is projected to experience about 1 degree Fahrenheit change larger than the rest of the state. And what can this cause? Well, when it's hot like that, it can really stress the vegetation, and any droughts may be more severe, and this can cause vegetation diebacks. And in this region of the state, vegetation often acts to stabilize dunes. These photos are from Arizona, but the same is true in New Mexico. These dunes have been stabilized by these plants, and if the plants die, the dunes can be remobilized by wind. So here you see these dunes are migrating across this road, and they can have quite a detrimental effect on communities, on roads, and on buildings. But they also have a significant effect downwind, because when they remobilize, it increases the amount of dust that enters the atmosphere, and this dust can be deposited on, for example, snowpack in high elevation mountains. And this can increase the rate at which snowpack melts. So dune destabilization in the northwestern high desert can affect mountains that are downwind that hold the snowpack that New Mexico relies on for its surface water and groundwater recharge. This area could experience an increase in arroyo formation. So arroyos are these streams that cut down into their floodplain. They can be quite narrow, and then they widen out, and they go through this cycle where they cut down and they widen out, and they fill their floodplain, and then they can cut down again. And when they do cut down, it's often related to a change in climate, and it can have effects on their local environment and downstream. So when the stream cuts into its floodplain, it can cause draining of marshes and cienagas because it lowers the water table. And then the sediment that it removes as it widens out and cuts into the floodplain is deposited somewhere downstream, and this can severely impact infrastructure, culverts and reservoirs, that kind of thing. And then when this photo here shows an arroyo that's actually south of Socorro, but it's the same concept where when this arroyo cut into its floodplain, it lowered the water table, and the vegetation that had been living up here that was stabilizing these surfaces died because it could no longer reach water. So this is the kind of thing that can happen when arroyos in size. And there's also a loss of floodplain efficiency. With a more narrow channel, floodwaters can't spread out across the floodplain, and so the water just ends up continuing downstream, and that can increase flood severity. Grasslands may transition to shrublands. So this chart here shows a grass that, this is actually near Las Cruces, but it shows a grass that declined significantly in the 50s and then never really recovered as a result of drought in the 50s. It never really recovered. And you can see in each of these photo panes that the grass has been replaced by mesquite and creosote shrubs. So while this may be near Las Cruces in this example, the same could happen in the northwestern high desert, just with a different kind of shrub. And this could actually have a positive impact on the recharge of the local aquifers, because shrubs require less water than grasses, but that's not really well understood at this point, and remains something that requires further research. Conifer forests will be stressed. Bosque trees may die back due to lower water tables. There could be a loss of riparian vegetation that could increase water temperatures and lower dissolved oxygen in streams. And then there could be an increase in E. coli concentrations in sediments. So we think of E. coli as a human or animal related bacterial contaminant, but it can actually live also in organic rich sediments in warm, slow moving streams. So as temperature warms and as surface water decreases, it could increase E. coli concentrations in sediments. So let's talk about the Rio Grande Valley and the Basin and Range now. So the Rio Grande Valley is this rift that extends from north to south in the state. It's quite narrow in the northern section and surrounded on either side by high flanking mountains, and then it broadens to the south. And it's estimated that the rift contains about 15,000 feet of sediment in total, and that sediment forms important aquifers. The rift also supports quite a lot of agriculture and some of the state's largest metropolitan areas. And then the Basin and Range is down here towards the Boot Hill, and it's one of the more arid parts of the state. These photos just show the Rio Grande, you can see here, and then some of the agriculture associated with the river in this photo here. So I'm going to talk about the Basin and Range first. As I said, it's one of the most arid parts of the state. It consists of, it's relatively low elevation, and it consists of these north and northwest trending mountain ranges, rugged mountain ranges with broad basins in between. And many of the basins are closed and have no stream outlet. And in wet years, lakes or playas can form in these basins. So here I've denoted the Lordsburg Playa, one of the largest playas. And because this part of the state is so arid, it's actually projected to experience some of the least amount of effect from climate change in the future, because it is already arid, or over the next 50 years. So the Rio Grande is expected to experience some significant impacts from climate change over the next 50 years. It could experience lower river flows, decreased evaporation, reservoir loss due to evaporation, and increased riparian demand and landscape and crop watering, both due to higher aridity and also maybe due to a longer growing season. And then there could be changes in timing of runoff, possibly due to earlier snowmelt, and this could be a challenge as well if the snowmelt water comes down the river before it's ready to be used for crops. It could generate a timing disconnect. This region, we anticipate possibly vegetation stress and a transition from grasslands to shrublands, bosque forest die-off due to water table lowering, arroyo incision and sedimentation, loss of soils and increased dustiness, and then compromised surface water quality, higher temperatures, lower dissolved oxygen, and possibly increases in E. coli contamination. So we'll talk about our last region, the Eastern Plains. So the Eastern Plains are relatively flat. They're characterized by grasslands to the north that transition to Chihuahuan Desert to the south. It's an area that's largely dependent on groundwater because of a limited availability of surface water. It's a region that's projected to experience a temperature increase about 1 degree Fahrenheit lower than the state average, but it's projected to experience higher aridity. Evapotranspiration is likely to experience the greatest change relative to other regions of the state. There could be a greater strain on groundwater due to limited surface water availability. Could be lower flow in rivers and increased evaporation from reservoirs. And if extreme precipitation increases, which, as I mentioned before, is a little uncertain, it would likely most strongly impact this area. And then there could be compromised surface water quality, higher temperatures, lower dissolved oxygen, and E. coli contamination increases are possible. So this region of the state, the soils are very susceptible to wind deflation if vegetation is lost. And this can lead to desertification with an increase in dust emissions and erosion on hill slopes. So this has happened before during the Dust Bowl. This photo here shows mills in eastern New Mexico in 1935. And you can see that it's really become a desert in 1935, and that could happen again. There could be a transition from grasslands to shrublands, a bosque forest die-off due to lower water tables, and arroyo incision and sedimentation. So I'm going to talk about chapter 11 of the report, Data Gaps and Challenges. So the panelists for this project, after assessing the state of knowledge, identified some areas where increased research could fill some of these gaps that we need to really understand or have a better understanding of how climate change might impact water resources over the next 50 years. So there are things that are uncertain or missing, areas that require research. Projected trends in total precipitation amounts are uncertain as of right now. Processes that determine what fraction of snowpack becomes river discharge are not well understood, and if they were understood, that could help decrease uncertainties in projected flow in major snow-fed rivers. Extreme precipitation, as I mentioned, remains very uncertain in future modeling. And then projections in the precipitation seasonality and recurrence intervals of storms is very uncertain. Aquifer water levels, particularly from lightly exploited aquifers, are not known. And then soil moisture data is also not readily available. And importantly, if these two data sets, aquifer water levels and soil moisture data, were made publicly available, that would be ideal. We are missing comprehensive studies on the impact of a warming climate on water quality. In particular, there are few studies that address this topic in New Mexico. We're missing comprehensive studies on the hydrological response to watershed vegetation changes. The length of time required for landscapes to adjust following major disruption is not well understood, and the process of sediment transport downstream to rivers also requires further research. Studies are needed on soils, plant communities, and geomorphology in high elevation mountain ranges, and research on the possibility of increased aquifer recharge as a side effect of increasing shred dominance is needed as well. And then some sort of more specific numerical modeling gaps. There needs to be developed a methodology for fine-tuning global circulation model methodologies, particularly for local models, to determine the most likely outcome rather than all possible outcomes. So global circulation models the grid size is too large to really understand regional and local climate projections. And so they're downscaled so that they can better model regional and local climate phenomenon. And so the process of determining which models present the most likely outcome, it needs to be figured out, because as of right now, the presenting all possible outcomes doesn't really help plan very well in terms of managing water resources. If there was a way to determine which models present the best possible outcome or the most likely possible outcome, that would be ideal. And there needs to be a lack of New Mexico, or there is a lack of New Mexico focused hydrological models. Numerical modeling gaps in vegetation exist as well. There needs to be an incorporation of ecosystem disturbance processes into process-based vegetation models. This photo here shows the Dalton fire near Pecos, New Mexico, where after the fire went through, the ecosystem changed from a conifer forest to an oak shrubland. So that kind of disturbance process needs to be included into process-based vegetation models. And then we need to develop simpler vegetation dynamics models based on observational data. So that's all I've got for you today. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, please ask away.
Thank you so much. What a great presentation. Yes, if anybody has any questions, please use your question box. We'll give you a few minutes to ask some questions. We don't have any at the moment right now. Is there anything, I'll add one thing. Again, this is recorded. It will be on our website, and it's under the in case you missed it area. And again, if you want the recorded, it will say recorded presentation. Okay, we do have a question now. Here's your first one. Why wasn't the Gila area analyzed?
Analyzed for what specifically? Just included in the study, you mean?
Yeah, I think it's,
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of included in the basin and range or the Mogollon Daddle section. It's kind of more in the Mogollon Daddle section of the report. So the whole state was considered. It wasn't left out. I just didn't mention it specifically.
thank you. Based on this, will the area around Santa Fe likely transition to shrubland?
You know, I'm not really equipped to answer that question. That's more of a question for Craig Allen. And I would suggest, you know, shooting him an email or putting it in the public comments when the report is available for view through the ISC. That's something that he could answer, but I'm afraid I can't.
Absolutely, yeah. If you want to specifically ask a question towards a subject like that, get on that comment input page, kick it in, and it will get to the expert of those chapters. We are no questions at this time. I will cover a little thing right now. On Wednesday, we will be going over the resiliency introduction, talking about the definition of it. Again, that is at 2 o'clock. I believe the state engineer might be there to present also. And then hopefully we'll have a newsletter sent out within the week to give you all the events in September. And also the leap ahead analysis should be ready for public comment within the next week or so. So when those are ready, again, that should be on the newsletter coming out. Here's another question. I believe I heard during a presentation on woody encroachment that precip is falling later in the year, favoring woody species as opposed to grasses. Is this true?
I don't know. That's a good question, and I imagine that it depends on where you are as well in the state. Again, that's a question that's very complicated and one that I am not equipped to answer, but I encourage you to submit it to the comments section.
Absolutely. All right, let's see. Let's see. We are okay. You have we are out of questions at the moment. I'll give a few more minutes just for people to submit any final questions. Is there anything that you want to cover just on the variations between these climatic regions and anything that popped out to yourself as you were looking at this?
Oh, you mean as I was working on the project?
Anything large that you noticed that something that you want to touch on before we're done?
I guess I hadn't considered how many processes can result in particular, destabilization of the landscape and the soils in particular. I knew a little bit about the way soils could be stripped depending on which direction a hill faces, but I hadn't thought cumulatively about the effects of fire and vegetation loss and pest outbreaks and all these different things that could result in stripping of these soils and sediments off of the landscape, and then of course the damage that they could do downstream. And so that surprised me. This photo, for example, here of this arroyo system south of Socorro, I mean it's incising and I don't have a good idea of when that incision happened, but in the background here you can see it's a little bit smoky, and that's actually a fire in the San Mateo Mountains. So these two hazards were collected in the same photo, and they can cause similar landscape disruption. So that was something that I was surprised by this project.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. This was fascinating. I especially I think as we put things into climatic regions, it is important. as our first question about the Gila area, things were analyzed at a large scale because you know, otherwise we would have everything split up into like 20 different regions, you know, but it's very fascinating. I think this was a really good overview of how the regions vary and all that information. We haven't got any more questions. Again, please go to our website, the 50-year water plan website, for further information when the leap ahead analysis is available for public comment and question. It will be in our newsletter that's coming out, and anybody that's on our email list will be getting a mass email on it that it's available, and there'll be a link on our website kicking you to the location of that document where you can make comments and read it. So I think that is it. We don't have any further questions. Thank you so much, Kristin, for presenting today. This was a great presentation, and the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, thank you and all the Climate and Water Advisory Team for participating in the leap ahead analysis process, including Nelia Dunbar, who really was a leader of the team and keeping it all organized, everything. We really thank you for all your efforts and all these webinars for the public, going in depth on everything. And I think these will be available again on our website for time to come, and we hope people take the time to sit down and listen into all this information, because it's really interesting, and it's very important that people understand what is going on into our future. So I thank everybody for participating. Thanks for joining us on our webinar today. And again, Wednesday is the Resiliency Information Forum. Please participate on that, 2 p.m. You can jump onto our website for events to register, and I will see you there. I'm sure, maybe Kristin, you might be there.
Probably
So,
I will be, yes.
Yeah, so I thank you again for presenting today, and thanks everybody for participating. We will see you Wednesday.